Thanks, Jeff. And thank you all for coming to this. This is a fascinating conference that was held for 5 years in LA, and I followed it there, and it's great to have it here in Arizona. As a member of ULI, I'm very, very excited about that. I have the opportunity to give you my what I call my rabbit hole speech, which is my rabbit hole theory of recessions. Normally I do this in 45 minutes or so as kind of a keynote talk, and now I have 8 minutes to give it, so I'm going to give an abbreviated version of my rabbit hole theory. And this sets up nicely for really how we need to rethink a little bit the way we plan, the way we develop, the way we grow in this metropolitan region and in the state as a whole. So my theory is about recessions. Recessions are sort of like falling into a rabbit hole. And for those of you who are as old as I am and were around back in the mid-late 80s, and we fell into that rabbit hole, that recession that was caused by the S&L crisis. And we fell into a fairly deep rabbit hole, but we bounced back out as a community, and we bounced back out as a state. We came up, we lost our S&Ls, which was the way we were essentially funding the infrastructure and growth, but we came up with the community facilities districts. I actually wrote that law for Arizona, but that doesn't. So we came up with an alternative mechanism, and we just forged on, and we continued on with our growth pattern of growing on the urban edge and on and growing outward and continuing to really use growth as a driving economic sort of engine for the valley, for our metropolitan region. And then, of course, in 2000, early 2000, we had our .com little rabbit hole recession, which, frankly, for us, for our state, for our valley, wasn't even much of a hole at all. I mean, if we fell into that rabbit hole, it failed barely to twist an ankle and bounce right back out again, and didn't cause us to change our thinking at all about the way we grow, the way we sort of think about the valley from an economic standpoint or from a growth pattern standpoint. This rabbit hole, however, was different. Of course, this rabbit hole, as we all know now from looking back on it over the last 5-6 years, in many ways was caused by the growth industry. Was caused by the overexuberance of investors and home builders and the developers and sort of how we use growth, particularly in the valley and this metropolitan region in Vegas and some of the other what I call the sandy regions, of the country. Those were the areas that really were caught up in this the most. And it was these areas that really used growth, used home building and development as a primary economic driver. And we fell down that rabbit hole like Alice falling down the rabbit hole, for several years, and hit bottom and sat on the bottom of that rabbit hole. And we sat and sat and sat for 3.5 years or so, looking up that rabbit hole where you see blue sky up the top of the rabbit hole, and it forced us as a community to think. It forced us to think about the last couple of rabbit hole recessions we fell into, think about how deep this one is, think a little bit about what we want that world to look like as we come out of that rabbit hole. And what I think a lot of us as a community here in the valley and in this region, in this state, what we've come to the conclusion is that we need to have a little different economic model. That growth for growth's sake, if we cannot have an economy that is built on home building and growth is a primary driver. We as a development industry, we have to realize that we're building for primary industries. And we're building commercial buildings, we're building homes for the employees and for industries that are the primary drivers. I like to use HEAT, H-E-A-T, the acronym HEAT, to talk about healthcare. We are now one of the best and most vibrant healthcare industries in the country in terms of growing our healthcare sector as we're coming out of this recession. E is green energy jobs. We're going to hear more about that, about how Arizona is one of the largest drivers of green energy jobs in the country. A is aerospace. Aerospace has always been a hallmark of the state and of this region, but we've sort of forsaken. We kind of forget about the quality of jobs and the number of jobs we have in aerospace. And the T is technology, both green tech, both hard tech and soft tech. And we're starting to grow those. If we think about driving those primary drivers as our economic inducers for the valley, for the economy, and us as the development industry, planning for and developing products to support that. But we're basically a support industry, not a primary driver. That's going to change how we come out of that rabbit hole coming out. But the second part, not just diversifying our economy, but the second part is how we grow and how we develop. And there's really three pieces to that. The first is sort of where we grow. And what we realize as we've been sitting down at the bottom of the rabbit hole is, as we're reading lots of newspapers that are thrown down to the bottom of the rabbit hole, is that we realize the federal government's broke, the state government's broke, local governments are pretty much upside down. And then what we've counted on as a development industry for the last 3 decades to really fund our economic expansion into these suburban areas, infrastructure, streets, water, sewer, police, fire, substations, schools, all that necessary public infrastructure, public funds aren't going to be there for that come out of this rabbit hole. That for the next, you pick it, decade, 2 decades, maybe even longer, to think that government's going to have the funds to help with that, and even the community facilities we came up to are just a limited, came up with after that first recession are just a limited tool. And so funding of infrastructure just isn't going to be there as we're coming out of this rabbit hole. So we're going to have to rely on what we have. The good news about that is that we've got a great skeleton of infrastructure in this metropolitan region that we've built over the last several decades. So we've got this skeleton that we have the opportunity to build within and build off of. Extend off of our freeway system, extend off our light rail system, extend off our water sewer systems that are in place today. And so we have an opportunity, unlike other regions in the country which did not have significant investment in infrastructure, we have the opportunity to infill. And when I was talking to folks in New York about this at a speech a year ago for ULI, infill to them is a 5-acre parcel, a 10-acre parcel. Infill for us can be a 500-acre parcel, or 1,000. We've got these parcels within the 101, 202, 303 freeways that have essential backbone infrastructures close or nearby that we can extend off of that allow us to grow more inward and upward. But more particularly, as you'll hear from the panelists, it's more these infill parcels along light rail, along our essential street systems, our arterial street systems, that allow us to grow where really we need the growth to be, and in some of these transportation node areas. So it's where we grow is important, number one. Secondly, how we grow, what we build. We have to acknowledge that not only did we sprawl in the way we grew, but we also built product that had a sort of a lifespan to it. We built paper mache homes that had a lifespan of maybe 40 years, and we thought, oh, that's okay, we'll just tear it down and rebuild that neighborhood down the road. Same thing with commercial buildings. We would build commercial buildings that had a lifespan of 40 or 50 years, and then we build them. That's not the way the rest of the country, the rest of the world builds buildings and products. And we have to do a better job of building more sustainable, long-term, sustainable not just from an environmental standpoint, but sustainable in terms of long-term potential of those buildings to be repurposed, to be reused over time. So the way we build. And then the third is how we structure these deals. We're going to have to use public-private partnerships. Yes, true public-private partnership. Yes, true P3s in terms of, we went in and amended our P3 statute, which allows us to use some public funding to attract private capital. So yes, we have that in place for infrastructure. But I'm not even talking about informal public-private partnerships. Like what happened with the State Farm located their new facility on Tempe Town Lake. That was essentially ASU coming together with a developer, with the city of Tempe, and bringing a contractor builder to the table. All four had to lean into that to make that project work. Otherwise, the project wouldn't have worked. But those kind of projects, bringing together a creative developer, private sector, bringing together some creative financing, bringing together a city that's willing to lean into it a bit more and be creative, and then bringing together a builder that's willing to help them. Those kinds of partnership deals are how we're going to have to grow out of this rabbit hole. Thank you very much.
So with that, I was going to ask Shannon, why don't you talk a bit about some of the types of projects that will anchor that vision of where we're going? If not, we'll play past the mic.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you for having me here today. I know VerdeXchange, we heard last night, is the real foundation for VerdeXchange in LA, and now here is about connections, connections, connections. Connections across all kinds of infrastructure that's necessary to create, frankly, the types of communities that Steve was just talking about, but also connections between all of the folks here that are frankly rolling up your sleeves and getting stuff done. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a bunch of folks. It's a collaborative. We have 35 plus partners, public, private, nonprofit, that really didn't wait down at the rabbit hole holding their breath for everything to come back and boom again. Is there a clicker for my side or just, okay, thank you. And is it just the right? There we go. So this quote, I think, is a good quote from Thomas Friedman, and it was in the New York Times we're going to keep passing, a few, well, it's probably about 6 months ago, and it says, thank God there's still a bunch of people across America, innovators and entrepreneurs who just didn't get the word. They didn't get the word that Germany will lead our lunch, or that China will lead our, Germany will lead our breakfast, or that China will lead our lunch. They didn't get the word that we're in a recession and heading for a fiscal cliff. Instead, they just go out and invent stuff, and fix stuff, and collaborate on stuff. They are our saving grace, and whenever I need to pick me up, I drop in on one of them. So what we're doing here is everybody on this panel is committed to collaboration. And Jeff kind of jokingly said, you're our competitor. But you know what? If we're going to welcome the next 6 million people to Arizona, really none of us are competitors. We have a lot of work. We have abundance of opportunities. I see David Jones with the Arizona Construction Association nodding his head. So the question is, what do we do to welcome the next 6 million people? Well, we learned through 7 boom and bust cycles, or hopefully we've learned through 7 boom and bust cycles, that those patterns have not served us well. And now what the market's telling us, aging baby boomers, the millennials, and the families in between, is they're saying, we're not all that enamored with driving, we feel connected through our technology, we don't hold our breath until we're 16 so we can get our car and feel like we have freedom, because at 2.5, they already experienced iPads and they feel free and connected to the entire global system. So how do we build communities for that huge market of folks that want to come here for, frankly, I mean, I just talked to somebody that's from the Central Valley. She's helping me out here as a volunteer. She said, this weather is unbelievable. And I said, that's what's brought so many people here for so long, not for 4 months out of the year, but for the rest of the year. But how do we keep them? How do we keep our talented workers? And how do we make sure that folks that come here to age with a high quality of life are not shut-ins once they can't drive a car anymore? So connections, connections, connections is the key to the collaborative. I'm going to show some pictures, because pictures are always great. We're very visual. And these pictures are pictures that, frankly, if it wasn't for the $20 million fund, and if it wasn't for the collaborative, pulling those 35 partners to do the heavy lifting together, we wouldn't have this kind of infill development. So these are 3 market rate workforce housing developments. 2 of them are in downtown Phoenix. They're in lots that have been vacant for more than 50 years. The developers could not find a way to make these developments work, and the city, frankly, didn't really want to bother with developing in the urban core when they were so darn busy developing in the exurban fringes. One of these developments is the development that is adjacent to an affordable housing development, which I'll show you a picture of, that is magnificently designed and magnificently managed. And it is a development that's mixed income, and it's right next to an affordable housing structure, multifamily housing structure, that you would not know the difference. You do not know the difference, because they're so well designed and so well managed. This is just a closer look at the vacant lot, which I'm sure many of you have whizzed by in your cars or your SUVs or your minivans. And it's, again, the assemblage of 3 parcels with an access road, frankly, that I know you heard it here, the city of Phoenix removed a vehicle lane to create a transit-oriented development assemblage of these 3 parcels. They also removed narrowed Roosevelt to allow on-street parking to better orient this TOD to the light rail station. It is within blocks of 4 light rail stations, and frankly, some of the parking has been modified. Yes, you heard it here. Some of the parking has been modified because it's truly TOD. This is a healthcare center. The collaborative is really about community development as well as housing. The 20 to 30 to 40 minute city, where you can do everything you need: healthcare, childcare, grocery shopping, living, work, play, recreation, dog park, without having to get in your car. I know it sounds crazy, but the mission of the collaborative is to focus 20 to 30% of new housing starts in community development within high-capacity transit corridors, starting with the 20-mile light rail spine, the 37 miles of extensions, and the major bus routes, frankly, that carry hundreds of thousands of people every day through this valley. So healthcare is a huge, huge piece of that community development. This is at the Main and Sycamore Station. All of these developments are connected to the light rail line. I had to give a shout out. I knew that Proud Papa over here would mention something about Marina Heights. I do want to give a plug to the collaborative and to LISC as well, the Local Initiative Support Corporation. If it wasn't for constant badgering and nudging by our collaborative partners in LISC, the opportunity for that private-public nonprofit partnership wouldn't happen, because State Farm was going to go up to the Northwest Valley, take an undeveloped tract of land, and build their regional facility. But instead, what did they do? They decided to go TOD. They decided to locate their employees at the highest level of the corporate structure of State Farm. They made this policy decision to locate their employees and connect their employees to urban vibrancy. And that's the Marina Heights development. That's $600 million, and it is the largest commercial development in Arizona history. Now, the seeds for that were created, obviously, by everything at Hayden Ferry Lakeside. And then, I love this slide, because I think it represents the true renewal that we're talking about. Is that Rick Namath? No, okay, I'm sorry, I was going to point at Rick Namath. There's lots of city people, Rick one of them, Ed Zerker, folks within the city of Phoenix, Councilman Sundt, who's been a huge advocate for a lot of this for many, many years, before it was popular, frankly. And this is an area at 3rd Avenue and Camelback that had seen no activity, no economic activity, since the light rail was built in 2008. And frankly, what our fund has done, and I want to give a shout out to Alliance Bank, because our fund, 2 community development financial institutions, which Silvia will give you a snapshot about in a little bit, came together mainly to also entice traditional lenders and our local community banks to be part of the capital stack to make these developments work. And you know what, it's hard work. And Alliance Bank came in and worked with our fund so the developers could get this off the ground. It's an adaptive reuse of the defeaters, and it's very exciting. It'll bring 100 jobs to that area that has seen no activity in many, many years. And this is just a snapshot of the affordable housing. The low-income housing tax credit has been a very workable financing tool during the recession. It's been dependable. It's been something that the traditional lenders feel is not, when there's a LIHTC deal, that funding is not as risky. And so this is a list of our affordable housing that we've actually been able to leverage the fund to create. And now I would like to pass it on to another one of our collaborative partners who has been advocating for this for how many years? Can I date you? How many years have you been advocating for this? 15. Yeah, 15. 30?
I will try to endeavor to get through my stuff real quickly so we can keep us on schedule. You know, a couple of things that Steve talked about and that Shannon talked about is it's a different world. And the thing I like to throw out is that if MAG is correct on their projections with 2.5 million more people in the next 20 years, to put that into perspective, that is the size of today's metropolitan Denver. So the next time you go to Denver, look around. Everything you see, we're going to have to build. And a lot of stuff here, because of the short lifespan of our buildings, we're going to have to tear down and replace. So the real key is, what do we do to either make sure that we have sustainable new development, and if we do adaptive reuse, if we can, of things that are there currently. Challenges you have is that, again, as was mentioned, is that the development community here has been primarily over the last decades outwardly focused. You give them 1,000 acres and they can recreate paradise. You give a city block downtown and they have no idea what to do. Almost every major development in downtown Phoenix was developed by an out-of-state developer, with the exception of Red's work at Cityscape. The first real venture of a local company coming in and doing what is about a $600 million, 1.2 million square foot project, which is really also the first true mixed-use project, because not only do you have the big office building and you've got a hotel, but starting in about 90 days you can rent an apartment above the hotel, and you've got about 180,000 square feet of retail. All right there, all well within walking distance, surrounded by 4 light rail stations. That's the kind of thing we need to see in the future. But it's a challenge to do those things, because quite frankly, as we all know, this is the state that leads the country in the fewest tools available for development. We got none. In most other states, the stuff that we're trying to do would be TIF, TIF, TIF. And yet we don't have that tool. And a lot of the tools we do have been either neutered or taken away from us. So one that I want to talk about briefly that we're working on in the Discovery Triangle, which is another, for those of you that don't know it, Discovery Triangle is a public-private partnership with Phoenix and Tempe and 10 organizations that are looking to redevelop the area between downtown Phoenix and downtown Tempe, Papago Park being the third point of the triangle. Some of the first parts of this valley that got developed, and yet nothing's happened to it in decades. And yet if you look at that 25 square miles and you really delve into it, it is probably the most asset-rich 25 square miles in the southwestern United States. And I say that because it's anchored by an international airport, light rail, heavy rail, freeway systems, major universities on all corners, plenty of land, about 180,000 jobs. This is a place where lots of things can happen to take advantage of all that infrastructure that is currently in place. So one of the tools that we have available to us is GIPLET. You all know what GIPLET is, Government Property Lease Excise Tax. That was used a lot to do almost everything downtown Phoenix, a lot of projects in Tempe and other cities. Well, the legislature decided they wanted to change it. First, they wanted to eliminate it a couple years ago, but there was some effort to restructure it in a way that it could stick around, and a lot of communities were able to grandfather in sites that they had available. And since we have so few tools, this was an important one. So one of the things that GIPLET, the change in law, said is that these areas had to be, you could only do GIPLET projects in central business districts. Every city could only have one CBD, and it had to be contiguous. And oh, by the way, it couldn't exceed 5% of your incorporated area. So for someplace like Tempe, it gives them 2 square miles, which basically is their downtown and the park along the lake and parts of the Discovery Triangle that are in Tempe. For the city of Phoenix, with 500 square miles, they could do a 25 square mile CBD. 25 square miles. To give you some perspective, that's about the current CBD you see there. And that's, the green line is the light rail line. That's a little over 2 square miles. So think about how that could be 12 times that size and meet state law, which would allow you to use the GIPLET tool for assistance in development to give some property tax relief to help make projects more financially feasible. Well, you had some things though, as I said, but here's the key: you had to be able to determine it was predominantly slum and blight. And if you're a property owner, I'm not sure you want your land to be considered slum or blight. But that's a requirement, and predominant is the word, which means by our discussions is that 60% of the land within the area you're trying to designate has to meet that characteristic. Fortunately, they will allow us to incorporate existing redevelopment areas as part of that. It can be expanded while not taking away, in essence, the right to use GIPLET in a redevelopment area. And so we started on a project for the city of Phoenix to look at this to see how could we effectively expand the city CBD in order to allow this tool to be used in other areas. And if you want to do things like rental housing and the like, it's a great tool and it's an important tool to make the project pencil. Well, we decided that this orange designates, these are all the existing redevelopment areas in the city of Phoenix. Fortunately, they didn't sunset. So they're still out there, they're still able to be used, and quite frankly, a lot of them are very contiguous. But we wanted to focus in on the area following the light rail line out towards Tempe. So all these circles you see here are the areas that we've been studying to determine where we could draw a line that could allow this to be an expansion of the city's central business district. So this is a parcel by parcel analysis. And there are tens of thousands of parcels of land out there. And you have to, we're coming in with specific recommendations, but then you got to go out and sell it. And the other caveat with this whole thing is, once the city council adopts this, which we expect it to be in the spring of next year, you have to wait a year before you can use the tool. So some of these things could come online to help transitory development along the light rail line out into the east until 2015. But because this is one of the few tools we have, it's worthwhile.